got friends, only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been winning all the war, and I've been shutting down the stars.
And welcome to Put That Coffee Down, the Freight Sales Show for closers. My name is Kevin Hill. I'm your host today here on FreightWaves TV. We're on every 12 p.m. right here, same time each week, Eastern Time. That's 12 noon on the dot Eastern Time. So high noon, just like Gary Cooper. We have an exciting show for you today. We should have Omar Singh in here in a few minutes talking about digitizing, I can't even ever say digitizing routing guides. And we talked about this a little bit last week with Andrew Leto from Emerge. We're going to talk about it a little bit today. It's all really about that dynamic pricing and that technology and what's the future really of annual bids, which has a lot to do with freight sales, how you sell RFPs, RFQs, those contract pricing. And we'll talk a little bit about the contract and spot market today because we're seeing a market turn, and we will get Omar's insights about that. But first, let's talk about May 9th and 10th. Coming up very shortly, 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks really. We're going to be in Northwest Arkansas, live on stage, doing everything we can, talking about the future of supply chain there in Rogers, Arkansas at the Convention Center. It's going to be a great event, great networking opportunity. If you haven't been out to an event in a while, it's been a couple years since we've put on an event. So come out, see everybody, make new friends, see this technology that has been really ramped up during COVID, during the pandemic. There's a lot of exciting things that you will see all through the supply chain. One of the keynote speakers is Billy Beane. He is with the Oakland A's, created Moneyball, really, if you've ever seen that movie, or the Michael Lewis book. You read that. Moneyball changed sports forever. That was about 20, 25 years ago. He'll be up on stage talking about data-driven decisions and what to do. So with that, it is baseball season as well, and we're talking about baseball right before we came on air. Cody, I'm sorry, my New York Mets beat your Cardinals. Last night, it came back, I guess, in the top of the ninth. I wasn't able to see it, but you did. They're 13-5. Great April. They always have a good April, then everyone gets hurt. But excited to see baseball coming back, and I need to watch more games going into the future. So I ran across a couple of interesting articles over the week. And one of those is, I believe it was from The Hustle. I don't have it written down here. But one of the things, and we're seeing this in the freight market too, right? We're seeing this in the freight market. One of the highlights of this, and it was really looking at stocks and Netflix in particular. Netflix, I think, lost 35% in one day because they lost subscribers. And one of the key takeaways from the article was that pandemic behaviors aren't sticky. We all thought that all pandemic behaviors would be pretty sticky. I think there are some sticky ones, work from home, flexible work environments. I think that's going to be a sticky trend that came up over the last 2 years. But one of the things is the consumers are shifting their spending habits back to the normal pattern. And I think we're really seeing that. As I said, I was on a flight a couple weeks ago whenever the mask mandate came out. I was mid-air. Everyone was excited. I think you're going to see more experiences, more spending. I think less at home. You know, that's where it hurts Netflix. It is less at home time. People are going to get outdoors, see their old friends, do some traveling, and rely less on technology that just sticks you in the house. So that's something important to consider as we move through the spring and summer months here in the freight markets. And with that said, let's welcome Omar onto the show. Omar, how are you doing today?
All right, Kevin, how are you? Good to see you.
Doing great. Omar Singh, president and founder of Surge Transportation. We're going to talk about routing guides and digitization of that and the technology that's been coming up over the last few years, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. And you started the show with saying essentially almost like technology bad. People are taking a break. They're going to get back outdoors and start traveling again, but not bad. Just
Yeah.
it's taking a break, return to normal. You
Yeah,
know.
return to normal. So not all technology is bad, right? We've seen a lot of freight technology in the last 2 or 3 years as a result of the pandemic and different business models. It made everyone a little bit more efficient, I think, which is something that is going to be sticky. Now, things that tie you in at your house, indoors, kind of antisocial a little bit. I think those will relax, and you'll see some stocks fall because of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good. I know one of the things we keep hearing with all of the events we're starting to attend and register for, everyone's really grateful to be in person again. So it's a nice change for everybody. Um,
It is. It is a really nice change. A lot of times you need to do business face to face. The virtual screen is really good. It's that virtual face to face, but a lot of times it's better to sit down across the table and have lunch and
right.
talk business.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're not doing that today, but at least we got to a couple of weeks back. So,
We did.
you know,
We did. It was a pleasure. We had lunch and dinner a few times in the last month, which is
yeah,
last couple months, which is always good. So
yeah.
let's talk about digitization. Let's talk about routing guides. Let's talk about what you're doing at Surge.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's been interesting is, two things kind of happened over the last sort of supply chain disruption with COVID. One, of course, routing guides failed a lot more often than what we're seeing almost return to historical norms of around 10%, which is where we are right now at tender rejection and kind of where we were before COVID started. And then spent so much time in 50%, and 25%. And at the moment, things are back to normal. But so not only did we see the routing guides fail more often, and as a result of that, shippers relying much more heavily on sourcing capacity outside of traditional waterfall routing guide. But I think we also saw an acceleration of that conversion, not just to say, well, my routing guide's failing, so I need to find another provider, but my routing guide's failing, so I need to deploy another way of sourcing capacity, which is to rely less on the routing guide and more on real-time APIs and TMS capabilities that really just didn't exist, 5 years ago.
I think one of those, and it comes from an article that Surge sponsored on FreightWaves, is that a lot of the TMS providers are kind of giving that technology away for not for free, but to essentially for free for shippers, as they don't have to invest the time and resources, money to build it themselves, right? That they can purchase it off the shelf within their TMS.
Yeah, I think the TMSs are in a scramble to continue providing value to their customers and compete in a highly competitive marketplace to gain as many shipper customers as they can. And yeah, we have a few API customers who built their own capabilities on an on-prem system, and it's very expensive, and you need a tech team, and it takes a long time, and then onboarding each provider also takes a long time. So I think the TMS has really said, listen, we don't want our customers to have to experience that. We want to just deploy it as part of our updates. I don't know how TMS pricing works, if they charge extra for it, or if it's just part of their, package of service offerings and product development, where they say, if you stay with us, we're going to make it a valuable partnership for you, and we're going to give you these capabilities. Don't worry about developing it yourself. We're going to do it for you, and we're just going to, provide you access. And there's really widespread adoption by anyone who can get their hands on it.
Yeah, it's one of those tech trends that I'm talking about over the last couple of years, and you see this with a lot of innovation with a lot of companies. You can say work from home. You can say, whenever you're trying new things, you don't necessarily want to be the first one out there. It's a hard decision to make. It's a hard decision to make if you don't have to make it, right? But I think the pandemic and the market over the last 2 years have made it a very easy decision for shippers and really anyone to embrace, because you need an alternative, and you need a fix right now, right? So it takes all the abstract decision making away from it, and it becomes an immediate need and necessary. So you just go out and do it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, just kind of the validation of saying I'm gonna rely on the product development people to build something that works and is going to be reliable, and I don't personally have to have technical expertise, and I don't even have to hire a team that has technical expertise. I'm going to rely on them. Kind of like, if you spec a new car from scratch, it's not the exact same thing, but you just like have every decision to make. Or if you just buy it off the lot, it's like, oh, okay, it works. I'm going to go with that because I trust you guys built something good.
It's a good analogy, right? If you're trying to customize things, you can go down many rabbit holes. You can take months to make that decision. But certainly if you just go to a lot, right? Or if your car breaks down and you need a car right now, it takes it takes a lot of the decision making process away, right? Because if I need to go somewhere today, I'm just going to go buy a car, and then I'll worry about it after that.
Right. Yeah, and in that light, like kind of what we're talking about, I think a lot of shippers are not adopting TMSs that don't provide that capability anymore to say, yeah, I'm going to need you to have this, right? Whereas I think even 2 years ago, there wasn't I'm going to need you to have this. The way that
it becomes a need or a nice to have, or let's say a competitive advantage or a first mover advantage a couple of years ago, and now it's table stakes. It's the cost of doing business. Yeah, you basically you have to have one. If you don't right now, you're running behind other competitors or other people trying to source the same capacity you're trying to source right now.
Right. And one thing that's come up recently that it's sort of new for me because I'm obviously on the service side, but on the shipper side, I've learned that a lot of shippers sort of internally within their organization will get, they have the managers have their own KPIs, and KPIs are tied to how much freight is going into the spot market or auction environment overflow. Not just because it's typically more expensive, but, the routing guide's failing. It's a demonstration of how often the routing guide's failing. And so with the real-time capabilities, there's sort of two of them. There's real-time, which is before the waterfall, and then there's the spot market APIs. But a lot of shippers there's a lot fewer loads in spot now because shippers are activating that real time where it doesn't even have to get designated as a load that failed. There's just kind of extra providers on the routing guide that are available, fair market price, vetted well by the TMS, vetted by obviously the shipper because they're a provider for them and they're in network. And so we're even seeing a much smaller number of loads just available in spot. I mean, volumes are down, tender rejection is down, but I mean, in addition to that, the sort of a multiplication of all of these factors that are contributing to it. And one of them is that now the loads are just getting covered in the real-time APIs. They don't even have to go to spot.
Is that because of real-time or dynamic pricing, or is that more of a reset of contract rates that we've seen over the last few months?
Well, all of it, right? So there are a lot of factors. So yeah, contract rates caught up. Now with all of the recent changes with fuel prices and inflation, contract rates are higher than spot. So that's interesting, than market rates. But I think that's part of it. Also, the adoption and deployment of the technology. I've seen a lot of our TMS partners really develop their capabilities to spread it easily across their customer base over the last 2 years. They've made a lot of headway that kind of wasn't there before. So I think all of those factors come into play. And then, shippers realizing that the traditional routing guide doesn't have to sort of play the same role that it used to. And so one of the things that we talk about in the article are, some shippers used to publish backup rates, across all lanes, and they're saying, no, just go with the API. Some used to designate certain locations or lanes of theirs, whether it's depending on their priorities, high or low volume, to go to certain providers. And now they're saying, okay, we're going to send all that business to API. We're seeing where they're going not as deep on the routing guide, instead of having 5 or 6 providers, 2 or 3 published providers, and then going API. So all of it's really, I think, kind of the idea of the conversation of the article was the erosion of the routing guide, where it's not as deep and it's not as wide as it used to be. And that I think it's all of it, right? It's shipper adoption, acceptance of this technology has been good, realizing in a tight market, the name of the game is getting the capacity faster. In a soft market, this cost savings, to the fact that contract rates are higher than spot now. And providers like us, service providers and motor carriers, also developing the technology to be able to kind of stay in that space. So, yeah, changing before our eyes. It's kind of interesting to watch happen.
It really is. We're talking about routing guides. Does this bring us to dynamic pricing? And if it does, even if it doesn't, let's talk about dynamic pricing, right? What does that mean for the contract versus the spot market? I mean, we know we're in trucking. We know contract rates are paper rates, that they're not sticky.
It's right now the coin has flipped, whereas the contract rates were, I guess, not sustainable given all of the rapid changes in the supply chain that was happening as a result of COVID and imports and spending. But now I think what we're seeing is some shippers saying, hold on, I want to play the market because the market's turning favorable. So they're relying more on the dynamic pricing, which is essentially a same day real-time rate, and whatever providers decide to make a criteria for how they come up with a price, whether it's, again, if it's expedited or hazmat or during holidays or short lead time or whatever it is, just to be able to also recognize, when there is capacity and when there isn't capacity. And different TMSs call it by different names. Some say it's a dynamic pricing program. Some say it's a real-time pricing program. Some call it dynamic routing guide. I think it's many names for the same thing, a form of a real-time API that says, what's the fair market rate today on this lane on this day? And do you have capacity? And if it looks attractive enough, I mean, they're going with it,
They are, it's a new world. It really is a new world when you're talking about contract and RFPs, durations, right? So that's another part of this equation, right? The duration of real time or dynamic, however you want to coin the term, right? Are you seeing durations go down further and further?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think over the last couple of years, that was one of the more interesting. Kind of, you go from, the 12-month RFP to the 6-month RFP to, can you just refresh your 90-day rates, to, well, how about can you just give me a real-time rate today? And then sometimes, we even have, just depending on the relationship, customers who say, well, give me a rate until it's not good anymore. Because we don't know, maybe 90 days isn't, maybe it's 60 days, maybe it's 45, just give me capacity at a fair rate. And if I kind of benchmark you or gut check you against competitors, I want to make sure it's reasonable and, make sure the stuff is covered. So to watch that conversation go from 12 months to essentially what dynamic pricing is, one day, it's what's today's rate? And the adoption of that and acceptance of that, I think, has been, I don't know, I hate to use the word unprecedented, but it's probably accurate.
Well, I think it is. I think the last 2 years have been unprecedented, right? I mean, there's no other way to coin that. And hopefully they stay unprecedented, because I don't want to go through it again. But with that said, in 5 years, do you think we're going to see many, if any, 12-month RFPs go out? And do you think it's based on market volatility? It's probably based on both, right? Market volatility and the technology is just there not to have to put in all the time and resources to do a bid. So you don't have to do it for 12 months.
I think, one of the things we talked about on the article is that I think 5 years from now, the 12-month RFP looks different. It's going to be for fewer lanes, right? So So maybe you have your asset-based carrier, drop trailer, high volume, whether it's plant to customer or plant to plant or mixing, where they say, we have a certain percentage, call it 25 or 30% of our super high volume lanes that require drop trailers on both sides. Mm-hmm. And that maybe isn't as volatile over the course of 12 months as some of the others. So on a dedicated basis, I think they're going to stay relevant, on a high volume basis, they stay relevant. But I think over the course of, let's just say a shipper has 1,000 lanes and all 1,000 of them are out to bid this year. 5 years from now, 300-400. Right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. There's those high volumes, DC to DC, plant to plant, intercompany transfers, or you're delivering to your customers DC on a regular basis. It's a very vanilla kind of, 8 loads a day, 10 loads a day, 2 loads a day, whatever it is, right? You drop and hook, drop and hook, drop and hook. That is something that should have a very stable price, right?
Right.
And whatever percentage of your portfolio is that would be those 12-month or those long-term customer relationships. And then, you're going to have a middle portion that's going to be half and half. And then you're going to have that 20 or 30% kind of what we call the spot market, right? There are going to be irregular lanes, seasonal. If it's highly seasonal right now and you're putting out a 12-month bid, you're probably going to pad, if you're a carrier or broker, right, you're going to pad that a little bit because you're bidding one rate for the next 12 months. And there's going to be variability and volatility in there based on seasonal, but you can't do that in a traditional 12-month RFP. You can't call that out really. But if you're doing 3-month, 6-month bids on that, then you can adjust your price for the season.
Right. Yeah, and I think we also don't know where, freight volumes are the demand side, and then the supply side is drivers. I don't know, where we're going to see that land. And there's all the talk of driverless trucks and, autonomous vehicles. But I think there's also, the driver shortage is always still real and looming. One of the things, the conversations we're having right now with TIA is reducing the driver age. I mean, I know sort of our conversations about digitization, but this is, it's part of getting capacity into the marketplace. And so I'll be interested to see if that really takes off. It's kind of a compounding effect of not letting drivers under 21 kind of in a significant way get into the industry. And it's not actually a 3-year delay in getting drivers from 18 to 21. It's an entire life cycle of learning a trade delay, because then by the time, they're 21, they've already learned something else. And why would I go into trucking now? I just spent 3 years learning this other trade. And so it just kind of cuts off the supply, right? Just at the legs. Like, you don't get in and no one's going to cycle back 4 years from now to start all over again.
You're exactly right about that. It's not the lag time. It is the life curve, right? If you're going to become a plumber or carpenter or electrician and you can do that 18, at 21, you're not going to decide, I want to go drive a truck.
Right. Yeah. Now that I just started making money, let me start all over.
Yeah. Just learn my trade. I'm getting really good at it. Now I'm going to go start over again.
Right. Yeah. So I think, that certainly is going to be also, I don't know if interesting is the fair word, just to watch, to say there's a lot of efforts on getting, drivers and capacity, behind the wheel. And there's a lot of effort at automation of vehicles, and there's a lot of effort at automation and digitization of routing guides. I think everyone's hitting it from all angles, but I don't know that it's. I think it's always going to be an uphill battle. It is. It is. And thank you so much for coming on. Put that coffee down today, Omar. This is Omar Singh, president and founder of Surge Transportation. Always a pleasure having you on. And I will see you in a couple weeks out in Northwest Arkansas. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to it. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you, Omar. Omar Singh, once again, president and founder of Surge Transportation, talking about digitization, talking about APIs, talking about the technology that is sticky. You know, there's some technologies, some habits, consumer habits, certainly, that aren't going to be as sticky. E-commerce is certainly going to be sticky, but we might see the growth rate change on that as people, again, I think people are starting to do more experiences, getting out, traveling, seeing people instead of being holed up in their homes, watching Netflix and Hulu and buying things online and remodeling their houses. So we're seeing this. We're seeing this in the freight market. We'll keep close tabs on it here on Put That Coffee Down as we talk about freight sales every Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next week, have a great week and make some margin.
I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war. I've been shutting down the store.